The Khajiit have 17 different forms, from house cat-sized spies to tiger-sized war mounts, and every single one is determined by the moons at birth. From quadrupeds that look identical to your pet cat but can cast spells that would kill you, to bipedal jaguar warriors, to hairless diplomats you'd mistake for elves. Today I'm breaking down 8 of the most distinct Khajiit furstocks, and trust me, by the end you'll never look at elsewhere the same way. Starting with the smallest and most deceptive LFQ. That house cat sitting on the windowsill watching you? It might be a genius wizard gathering intelligence for the Khajiiti government. And I'm not exaggerating. Alfiq are a fully sapient Khajiit furstock, born under a waning Masser and full Secunda. They are identical in size and appearance to common house cats. Short-haired, quadrupedal, small enough to fit in your lap, but they possess human-equivalent intelligence, understand every word you say, and are extremely well-versed in magical arts. They just can't speak back in the way you'd expect, because their vocal anatomy is built for meowing, not conversation. Here's where it gets weird. Khajiit society uses Alfiq as spies. Deliberate. Outsiders see a stray cat and assume it's a pet or vermin. Meanwhile, that pet is listening to your war plans, memorizing troop movements, and relaying everything back to elsewhere through magical channels or other Khajiit operatives. Imperial soldiers have literally stroked enemy agents without realizing it. The Alfiq exploit this assumption ruthlessly, infiltrating camps, noble estates, and government buildings where a Cathay warrior would be stopped at the door. Within Khajiiti culture, Alfiq hold equal legal status to any other furstock. They're citizens, family members, scholars, mages. But their quadrupedal paws mean they need help with certain tasks. Donning armor, for example, requires assistance, which is both practical and slightly absurd when you remember that the cat who needs help getting dressed might also be the most powerful mage in the room. Their small size and innate spellcasting ability make them subversively dangerous. You think you're petting a cute animal. You're actually being assessed by someone more informed than the local jarl. The inversion is the point. Alfiq are proof that in Khajiiti society, your body is an accident of the moons, not a measure of your worth. A house cat-sized quadruped can be a war hero, a master of the arcane, or a high-ranking intelligence operative. Outsiders who dismiss them as animals are making a fatal mistake, and the Khajiit know it. But if you think a cat-sized spy is unsettling, wait until you meet the ones who live in the trees and rain spells down on you from above. Dajei. The Khajiit have a furstock that lives above everyone else. Literally, the Dagi are small, light bipedal Khajiit who dwell in the high canopy of the Tenmar forest, able to occupy branches too slender even for the Bosmer, which is saying something, because the Bosmer are famous for their arboreal agility, but the Dagi are lighter, faster, and higher than any other race in Tamriel. They've built an entire civilization in the treetops, a vertical society that most ground dwellers never see. We're talking platforms, walkways, entire settlements suspended in branches that would snap under the weight of a normal person. Here's where it gets interesting. The Dagi aren't just living up there for the view. They're known as powerful spellcasters, and in battle they rain magic down on enemies from treetop vantages, functioning as aerial mages. Imagine trying to fight a war when your opponent has wizards perched 50 feet above you, lobbing fireballs from branches you can't even reach. You can't climb up without getting incinerated. You can't shoot them because they're hidden in dense foliage. And you definitely can't ignore them because they'll burn your entire formation to ash. Khajiiti battle tactics deliberately exploit this, using Dagi as magical artillery while ground forces advance. It's a nightmare to counter. The Dagi Rot are slightly larger but still light enough for high branch life, serving as intermediate scouts and spellcasters. They occupy the middle canopy, bridging the gap between the highest Dagi and the ground-based furstocks. Together they form a layered magical defense that turns the Tenmar forest into a fortress. Attack one layer, the others support. Try to advance, you're getting hit from 3 vertical angles simultaneously. But here's the mystery. Dagi are rare, extremely rare. You almost never see them in ESO or other games, and that's sparked fan theories about lunar breeding patterns and seasonal birth cycles. Some players speculate that the specific alignment of Masser and Secunda required to produce Dagi only happens a few times a year, making them one of the least common furstocks. Others think Khajiit deliberately time births to avoid certain forms, though that raises uncomfortable questions about how much control they actually have over the Jakaje. The lore doesn't give us answers, which only makes the speculation worse. There's also a symbolic angle nobody talks about. The Dagi live closer to the sky than any other Khajiit, closer to the moons themselves. In a culture where Masser and Secunda determine your entire body and destiny, dwelling near the heavens might carry spiritual weight. Maybe the Dagi are seen as closer to the divine, or maybe they're just really good at avoiding ground-level politics. Either way, they occupy a unique space in Khajiiti society, both literally and metaphorically. At least the Dagi get to stay in the trees. The next furstock spends most of its time on the ground, blending in with the rest of Tamriel's humanoid races. Suthay. When you think of a Khajiit, you're thinking of a Suthay Rot. Every player character in ESO, virtually every Khajiit NPC you've ever talked to, every caravan guard and moon sugar dealer in Skyrim, they're all Suthay Rot, born under new Masser and waning Secunda. They're medium-statured bipeds with digitigrade legs, full body fur, pronounced feline faces, and long tails. One source describes them as the most beast-like of the small small bipedal Khajiit, which is ironic because they're also the most familiar. Here's the thing, the Suthe Rot aren't the default Khajiit. They're one first stock among 17, but because game engines can only handle so many character models, developers picked one form to represent the entire race, and that form happened to be Suthe Rot. So now, millions of players think this is what Khajiit are, when in reality, it's just what the moons decided for cubs born under one specific lunar configuration. It's the equivalent of meeting one person from a country and assuming everyone there looks identical. Except in this case, the differences aren't just height or build, they're entire body plans. Their lithe, athletic build optimizes them for agility and stealth, making them natural thieves, assassins, acrobats, and scouts. They occupy nearly every social role across Elsewhere: merchants, guards, monks, nobles, artisans, diplomats, and they serve as cultural intermediaries to outsiders, because they're the first stock most likely to leave Elsewhere and interact with other races. Walk into any major city in Tamriel, and you'll find Suthe Rot running shops, leading caravans, or working as hired muscle. They're adaptable, they're everywhere, and they're good at making themselves useful in societies that don't always trust beast races. They're the face of the Khajiit to the rest of Tamriel, which means the rest of Tamriel has no idea what the Khajiit actually are. The average Nord sees a Suthe Rot and thinks, ah yes, cat people. They have no concept that Khajiit morphology is determined by lunar phases at birth, that the species encompasses everything from house cat-sized mages to quadrupedal war mounts larger than horses. The Suthe Rot's ubiquity has accidentally erased the rest of their race from public consciousness. Because here's what nobody tells you. A Suthe Rot might have an Alphic sister who looks like a house cat, or a Senche Rot brother the size of a horse. Same parents, same litter, completely different bodies. The moons don't care about your expectations. They care about their phases, and if you were born under New Masser and Waning Secunda, you get to be the normal one, the one everyone assumes is the whole story. You get to be the ambassador, the stereotype, the singular image that defines your entire species to a world that can't be bothered to learn the truth. But if you think the most familiar Khajiit are strange, wait until you meet the ones who can pass for elves. Omis. Here's the thing about the Ohms. They don't look like Khajiit at all. No fur, no tail, no visible cat features whatsoever. They're shorter than a Bosmer, with pointed ears and smooth skin, and if you passed one on the street in Cyrodiil, you'd swear you were looking at a wood elf, which is exactly the point. The Omes are born under a new Masser and full Secunda, and the lunar lattice gives them the least feline form of any Khajiit first off. They're so mer-like in appearance that outsiders constantly mistake them for Bosmer, and Khajiiti society has weaponized this for centuries. Need to negotiate a trade deal in a city where beast folk aren't welcome? Send an Omes. Need to infiltrate an imperial garrison? Send an Omes. Need someone to gather intelligence in a Nordic mead hall where a Senche would cause a riot? Send an Omes. Their ability to pass as elves has made them Elsewhere's natural diplomats and spies, slipping through prejudiced regions where a Cathay Rot would be turned away at the gate. While other first stocks face closed doors and suspicious guards, the Omes walk right through the front entrance, conduct their business, and leave before anyone realizes they've been dealing with the Khajiit the entire time. But here's where it gets interesting. The Omes refuse to let biology erase their identity. To assert that they are Khajiit, they paint their faces and bodies with cat-like tattoos and war paint, creating feline features where the moons provided none. Stripes across the cheeks, whisker marks, stylized fangs, cultural assertion through ink and pigment. Some Omes take it further, wearing elaborate facial designs that mimic the fur patterns of Cathay or Suthe Rot, turning their smooth skin into a canvas for Khajiiti pride. It's a deliberate middle finger to anyone who'd reduce Khajiiti identity to having a tail and fur. They know what they are, even if you can't see it. The tattoos aren't decoration, they're a statement. Historically, Omes were a common sight across Tamriel before the late Third Era. You'd find them in markets from Daggerfall to Mournhold, blending in, doing business, keeping their ears open. They were so integrated into Imperial society that many non-Khajiit didn't even realize they were interacting with beastfolk. Then, sometime after the 4th century of the Third Era, they became rare outside Elsewhere. Nobody knows why. Maybe the political landscape shifted. Maybe other first stocks took over diplomatic roles. Maybe the Omes just decided the outside world wasn't worth the trouble anymore. The lore doesn't say, and the Khajiit aren't telling. What the Omes prove, more than any other first stock, is that being Khajiit isn't about biology. It's ontological. The lunar lattice determines your form, but your identity as one of the Jakadja is absolute. Whether you're a house cat-sized Alfiq or a hairless diplomat who could pass for a Bosmer at 50 paces. The Omes are Khajiit because the moons say so, and no amount of smooth skin or missing tail changes that. At least the Omes can walk into a city without causing a panic. The Cathay, on the other hand, look exactly like what nervous Imperials imagine when they hear the word beast folk. Cathay. Imperials call them jaguar men, which sounds cool until you realize it's just another way of saying we don't understand what we're looking at. The Cathay and Cathay Rod are large, heavily muscled bipedal Khajiit, born when both moons are waxing, and they occupy a sweet spot in Khajiiti warfare that makes them absolutely terrifying. They're bigger than humans, stronger than most warriors you'll ever meet, and somehow they still move like cats. That combination alone should make you nervous. Here's the thing. Cathay rot stand a foot or more taller than the average human, with broader shoulders, thicker limbs, and spotted fur patterns that do, in fact, resemble jaguars. But calling them jaguar men flattens them into an exotic curiosity, a label that focuses on their predatory appearance while ignoring everything else. They're not just big cats on two legs. They're disciplined soldiers, bodyguards, shock troops, and in some cases, the people literally carrying the mane in a palanquin laden with the braids of every tribe in elsewhere. Physical presence, in Khajiit politics, is not just symbolic, it's structural. What makes Cathay and Cathay rot so dangerous in combat is that they retain full Khajiit agility, despite their bulk. Most heavily built warriors sacrifice speed for strength, but Cathay rot do not. They can flank, ambush, and reposition faster than you'd expect from someone that size, which means they hit like a battering ram and then vanish before you can retaliate. Khajiit battle tactics exploit this relentlessly, using Cathay rot as the spear point of an assault, softening resistance and scattering defenses before the rest of the infantry arrives. If you see one charging at you, the correct response is to run. You will not win that fight. Their waxing moon origin carries symbolic weight too. Waxing moons represent growth, increasing strength, power that has not yet peaked but is building toward its apex. Cathay embody that energy in physical form. They are mature warriors whose strength is applied with discipline rather than recklessness, and that makes them more than just muscle. A Cathay rot bodyguard is not there to look intimidating, though they do. They are there because they can end a threat before it materializes, and because their sheer size allows them to physically shield their charge or carry them to safety if needed. When the main travels, Cathay rot are often the ones bearing the weight, both literally and metaphoric. But despite all of this, outsiders still reduce them to jaguar men, a term that exoticizes while oversimplifying. It treats them as beasts first and people second, which is exactly the kind of thinking that gets you killed in Elsewhere. Cathay are not animals. They are warriors, diplomats, merchants, and family members who happen to have been born under waxing moons. The spotted fur and the size are just the moon's will made flesh. The mind behind it is what you should be worried about. At least Cathay rot are easy to spot. The next fur stock is so rare that even Khajiit scholars barely know anything about them. Tojay. The Tojay and Tojay rot are among the most mysterious fur stocks in all of Elsewhere, and that's not hyperbole. Even in-universe scholars admit that nothing is known about the Tojay rot. Not we don't have much information. Not records are incomplete. Nothing. Zero. Which is wild, because they're born under waxing Masser and new or waning Secunda, lunar phases that should be common enough to produce a decent population. Yet somehow, nobody's documented them. No travelers' journals describing encounters, no imperial census records, no Khajiit oral histories that made it into the games. They exist in the lore as a confirmed fur stock with an assigned lunar phase, but beyond that, complete radio silence. Here's what we do have. ESO statues suggest they're spindly, lightly built bipeds with low-set ears, possibly resembling cheetahs or other fast, lean cats. The one concrete fact the Imperial Library gives us is that Tojay rot are larger and stronger than Suthay rot, but smaller than Cathay rot, which puts them in a mid-sized agile build optimized for speed rather than brute strength. That's it. That's the entire morphological profile. We're talking about a fur stock that should theoretically make up a noticeable percentage of the Khajiit population, and the sum total of hard information fits in 2 sentences. But here's where it gets interesting. Fan translations of Khajiit NPC dialogue describe Tojay and Tojay rot as playful and bothersome siblings, the kind who'd steal your sweet roll and be halfway across the market before you noticed. If that's accurate, it hints at mischievous, energetic personalities perfectly suited to scouts or messengers, roles that would make sense for a lightly built, fast-moving fur stock. A Tojay courier sprinting across the dunes with a message, or a Tojay rot scout slipping through enemy lines to gather intelligence. The profile fits. You could easily imagine them as the Khajiit equivalent of rogues or rangers, thriving in roles that demand agility, speed, and a bit of cunning, the kind of fur stock that would excel at hit-and-run tactics, or at navigating dense jungle terrain where bulk would be a liability. The community's been asking, where are all the Tojay? For years, and the answer is, we genuinely don't know. Some fans speculate they're concentrated in regions of Elsewhere we haven't explored yet, tucked away in remote jungle settlements or nomadic clans that avoid contact with outsiders. Others think it's just developer resource constraints, that Bethesda couldn't justify building unique models for a fur stock with almost no lore, creating a new skeleton, animations, and voice lines for a subspecies that appears in maybe 3 lines of in-game text. That's a tough sell when you're working with finite time and budget. Either way, the Tojay occupy this weird space where they're canonical enough to have a lunar mapping and a place in the Jakaje, but absent enough that even dedicated lorehounds can't tell you what one actually looks like in detail. And honestly, the mystery might be the point. Not every fur stock needs to be fully documented. The Tojay's elusiveness makes Elsewhere feel bigger, like there are entire populations and cultures operating just outside the frame of what the games show us. It's a feature, not a bug. The world feels more alive when you know there are gaps in the knowledge, when the lore admits it doesn't have all the answers. But if you think one ghost fur stock is frustrating, wait until you meet the Palmar, because that's where the real controversy controversy starts. Pamar. Pamar and Pamar Rat are described as similar to a tiger, and everyone agrees they're some of the strongest Khajiit you'll ever meet. But here's where it gets weird. Nobody can agree on whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Older sources, especially the GURPS material and early lore compilations, describe Pamar Rat as massive quadrupedal tigers, horse-sized, striped, and deployed like war dogs or shock beasts in battle. They're supposed to hunt alone across jungles and desert plains, mistaken by outsiders for actual tigers, because that's essentially what they look like. In this version, they're living battering rams, harnessed and directed by smaller Khajiit commanders to soften up enemy lines before the infantry moves in. Picture a Cathay Rat warrior riding into battle on what looks like a giant tiger, except the tiger is also a Khajiit, also sapient, and also fully aware it's about to wreck an entire formation of soldiers. The tactical advantage is obvious. You get the shock value of a cavalry charge combined with the intelligence of a thinking combatant who can adapt mid-battle. But ESO-era sources tell a completely different story. They describe Pamar Rat as giant bipedal super Khajiit, the strongest upright first stock, towering warriors used as elite bodyguards to nobles and the main. Forum discussions speculate that a Pamar Rat could crush Lyris Titanborn into dust, which gives you an idea of the power fantasy at work here. In this interpretation, they're not animals you ride into battle, they are the battle, walking on 2 legs and swinging weapons like any other Khajiit, just exponentially more dangerous. They're described as being able to wield 2-handed weapons in one paw, shrug off blows that would kill a Nord, and physically dominate any battlefield they step onto. Some accounts place them at 8 to 9 feet tall, with proportional strength that makes them living siege engines. So which is it? Walking tigers or bipedal giants? The lore doesn't reconcile this. It's likely a shift in developer conception over time, with different writers and game teams imagining Pamar differently, depending on what role they needed them to fill. The quadruped version fits neatly alongside Sencha Rat as a distinct battlefield animal, filling the niche of intelligent warbeast. The biped version creates a first stock that's visually and mechanically unique among humanoid Khajiit, a living tank that still fits the mold of warrior you can have a conversation with. It's the difference between deploying a trained tiger and deploying a 10-foot-tall barbarian who happens to be covered in fur and can bite through armor. What both versions share is the emphasis on raw, overwhelming strength. Whether they're charging on 4 legs or standing upright with a warhammer, Pamar and Pamar Rat represent the upper limit of Khajiiti physical power. They're deployed at critical points, guarding the most important figures or breaking the hardest defenses. Their fur is tiger-striped, their presence is fearsome, and their role is always the same. When you absolutely need something or someone destroyed, you send a Pamar. They're the nuclear option in Khajiiti military doctrine, the answer to fortified positions, heavily armored enemies, and situations where subtlety has already failed. If a Cathay is a standard infantryman and a Cathay Rod is a shock trooper, a Pamar Rod is the equivalent of rolling up with a tank. The biped versus quadruped controversy is one of those lore schisms that will probably never be officially resolved, because it reflects different eras of world building rather than a single coherent vision. Different writers looked at the same first stock name and imagined completely different creatures, and now both versions exist in the canon simultaneously, contradicting each other with no clear answer. But if you think the confusion around Pamar is bad, wait until you see the Senche, where even the name itself means 3 different things depending on who's talking. Senche. Here's the thing about the Senche and Senche Ra. They're not just big cats you can ride. They're Khajiit, fully sapient, fully intelligent Khajiit, who happen to be born as massive quadrupeds instead of bipeds. And yes, other Khajiit ride them into battle, which is, normalized in elsewhere and absolutely bizarre to everyone else. Let me explain the scale we're talking about. Sencha Rat stand as tall as 2 Altmer stacked on top of each other and can weigh as much as 50 Altmer. 50. That's not a mount. That's a living siege weapon. Sencha themselves are slightly smaller but still horse-sized, with elongated forelimbs twice as long as their hind limbs, creating this appish slope posture. Senchi Rat, on the other hand, have straighter legs optimized specifically for carrying riders, and charging straight through enemy formations like a freight train made of claws and fur. Imperial military texts describe Battlecat cavalry charges scattering entire defensive lines before the infantry even arrives. The phrase menacing shadows shows up repeatedly, because when you see a wall of these things thundering towards you, each one weighing more than your entire squad combined, the psychological impact hits before the physical one does. Soldiers break and run. Formations collapse. It's not cowardice, it's basic survival instinct. But here's where it gets complicated. The term Senche is flexible in Khajiiti usage. Sometimes it refers to the sapient first stocks, Senche and Senche Rat. Other times it refers to Senche tigers, which are lesser sentient great cats, basically just big animals. This creates ontological ambiguity that even the Khajiit themselves don't always bother to clarify. An ESO loremaster had to step in and explicitly confirm that Senche Rat are fully Khajiiti and as intelligent as any other first stock, meaning yes, a Khajiit may ride another Khajiit into battle, and both parties understand exactly what's happening. To outsiders, this is deeply weird. The ethics of riding a sapient being, even one who was born into a body designed for it, raises questions that most non-Khajiit would rather not think about. But in elsewhere, it's just how things work. The Jaka-J determines your form, and your form determines your role. A Senchurat born to carry riders doesn't see it as servitude any more than a doggy sees climbing trees as a limitation. It's what the moons made them for, and that's the culmination of the lunar lattice's power. One people, infinite forms. From the Alphic house cat to the Senchurat warmount, all sharing one culture, one identity, determined entirely by the moons. The spectrum is complete. Every first stock, from the smallest to the largest, fits into the same society, the same families, the same cosmic design. The Jaka-J doesn't just shape bodies, it shapes destiny. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.